Hello movie barfs and welcome back to the channel. Captain America Civil War was one of the top tier MCU entries. Despite some flaws, the movie managed to eke out a somewhat passable reason to pick Captain America against Iron Man, two characters who have been bickering ever since they met in the first Avengers. And if you've seen the film, you'd know that Team Cap wins the so-called Civil War at the end. But why is that? What made Team Iron Man take home the L at the end? Well, first off, it's quite clear that Team Iron Man's stance of being in favor of the Accords was flawed to begin with. The whole premise of Civil War is that due to collateral damage from one of the Avengers' missions, something called the Sokovia Accords was formed, which is basically another way of saying Superhero Registration Act as it was in the comics. All the Avengers would be owned by the government, and those who refuse and continue to operate would be deemed outside the law and labeled as criminals. But it's somewhat a bit of a stretch and also an inconsistency that Team Iron Man would be all on board with the Accords. When you consider the events of Winter Soldier, the whole point of the Avengers going private was so that they could avoid the politics and the corruption of being part of a larger organization, as was the case with Hydra infiltrating S.H.I.E.L.D. Trying to put them back into a governing body is a regression, a slipping back into the old ways we've already moved on from. Steve made an excellent point, which should have been taken more seriously, that the Accords would be run by people, and those people will have agendas, ulterior motives which may not result in the greater good. And somehow, the destruction from the past Avengers movies is used as a supporting point for the Accords, which is also flawed. It's clearly a case of misplaced blame here. The only one that you can hold against the Avengers would be Ultron, since that was 100% Tony's fault. When Loki invaded Earth, that would have happened whether the Avengers were there or not. Hydra infiltrating S.H.I.E.L.D., that would have happened without the Avengers too. In fact, without the Avengers, the death tolls for those events would have been far higher. So how are they responsible for the collateral damage? If anything, they helped to reduce it significantly. As for Lagos, that was an unfortunate incident from the bad guys managing to get a lucky shot, which inevitably happens from time to time. Having oversight or the interference of some governing body definitely doesn't prevent them from happening. Can the UN or any other governing body even be trusted to administer that kind of power? Secondly, Tony Stark's viewpoint was clearly biased. Honestly, when I heard about the premise of Civil War, I thought Tony Stark would be first in line to be totally against any form of government control. It's inconsistent with his narcissistic and untethered personality. And besides, Tony doesn't have the best relationship with the government, as we've seen in Iron Man 2. The only reason Tony is on board with the Accords is his own personal guilt over his mistake with creating Ultron, which caused the whole Sokovia incident. Before the Accords were released, Tony had a bump-in with a parent whose son died in the Sokovia incident, and the experience of focusing on that one individual victim was the sole reason why Tony feels they need to be put in check. Tony is right to feel guilty, but he's missing the forest for the trees here. He did mess up, but that doesn't mean everyone needs to pay for his own mistake. His viewpoint was clearly biased by his own failure. And thirdly, Team Iron Man was not open to reason. In addition to Steve's point of hidden agendas earlier, which Team Iron Man really should have listened to, Team Iron Man also failed to grasp the more important situation that Steve was trying to tell them before the airport battle showdown. Steve clearly tells him of the danger of Zemo's plan and the risk of the super soldiers being unleashed, but all of Team Iron Man just completely disregards it, which shows how unreasonable they were. And ironically, Tony actually tells Steve that his judgment is askew, when in actuality it is his own perception that is clouded. Cap just clearly told him of a much bigger threat, and yet here they are barking up the wrong tree. Clearly it was a mistake, as that was the start of Team Iron Man's collapse. Black Widow realizes that Steve may be right, and so she turns on them to help him escape. And later on, when Tony does get solid evidence of Zemo's involvement and shows it to Ross, Ross is so biased in his pursuit of Steve that he completely ignores it. Which brings us full circle to the point of agendas again. A bigger threat is present here, but Ross doesn't allow the Avengers to handle it. And in another state of irony, Tony, who was previously in favor of government oversight, now has to act outside the law in his attempt to find Zemo, which just solidifies Steve's warning of agendas earlier. Tony is in a state where he needs to address a threat, but cannot do so legally because of government oversight. At the end, with Black Widow and Black Panther jumping ship to join Team Cap, it's clear as day that Team Iron Man's stance was a mistake. Fast forward to Infinity War, even Rhodey also expresses his regret over supporting the Accords. Post-Endgame, we don't have any conclusion as to what happened to the Accords and whether it's still being enforced. Maybe the blip caused them to change their minds, but who knows? And more importantly, who cares? The Accords never made sense anyway, and it was just a plot device to get our heroes into an artificial conflict. So, what did you think, folks? Are any of you still on Team Iron Man after all that happened? Let me know down in the comments below. Thanks for watching, subscribe if you're new, and see you in the next one.